Right, it is a slightly blowy but very warm day, 1st of September 2024. In my UK tropical garden, we're going to look at colocasias, or commonly known as elephant ears, and we're going to have a look at some of the more, we'll look at a few different types, species, but we're going to look at the more cold tolerant ones as well, or cold hardy, and see which one has performed best in a fairly miserable summer, really. I mean, the last month has been nice, but up till then it's been quite poor, cold and wet. So we've got a random clump, I say clump, a spreading clump of pink china here. These have been in a very dry bed, so they haven't done too much, so it is going to for a dry area, the pink chinas have not done well. I mean, they've grown and they've multiplied, but they haven't done well at all. What's fared a little bit better is the escalenta, which is a standard green, and I find these pretty much as hardy, for me in my garden, pretty much as hardy as pink china, because I've got sandy soil, so it's free draining in winter. They don't tend to rot. I leave them in the garden every year, they always come back. And again, just because they're hardy don't mean they grow well, and they would grow better if they were watered and fed, but these have just been left to their own devices, as it were. And I could show you multiple areas where I grow these, and they've all come back from winter, and they've all struggled to an extent with the summer conditions we've had. This is another escalenta here, one of the bigger leaf ones, but still nothing giant proportion wise to something on a good year. Yeah, so they are literally everywhere, as we can see, and they've all survived winters, multiple winters, and grown to reasonable extent this year. So we're coming over to the pond area. So we've got a mixture of colocasias, some in the ground and some just in pots in the waterfall of the pond. So we'll start with ones in the ground. So we've got a white lava, which really hasn't done too much. It's got a little bit of colour in it, but again, not really been warm enough. The coal miner has done okay, but again, not grown massive, but has pumped out some leaves. Really nice when they first open up, but they do fade out to a sort of a dark off green, but when they unfurl, really nice. That's the coal miner. Again, just another standard escalenta here, nothing huge, but grown away nicely. And to be fair, we've got some of the same species in the pond in a waterfall in pots, and they've done pretty much the same. So if we look at this white lava here, and then we've got one in a pot in the pond, which is not too dissimilar. Again, the limiting factor would have been lack of heat, so they've not done much at all. Another coal miner here, a little bit bigger than the one in the ground, but is in a good sized pot in the waterfall, so it's got constantly wet roots. It's done okay. Redemption, again, very small leaves, only just getting a sort of pinky tinge to the leaves. Look nice, but very small, not hardy in the UK. The marigold, again, it's grown, it's pumped out a few leaves, but very small. And what I will do is, I did cut a couple of leaves off the marigold I'm growing in the hothouse, to give you an example of, given the right heat, what a difference the heat makes to the size of plant you'll eventually grow. So looking at this marigold here, it's a little bit bigger in my hand, but this is a leaf that I cut off one from the hothouse, which is a good 2.5, pushing 3 foot, so the heat is always going to be a limiting factor. In the UK it's always going to limit the growth you're going to get. We have got really nice colocasia here, so that's blue Hawaii. Again, really pretty leaves, but not grown to giant proportions due to, again, lack of heat. But it is in a big pot and has been watered and sort of fed to an extent. I don't overfeed. I just do a really good rich mix at the beginning of the year. Yeah, so really the boring answer would be, what's the best colocasia to grow in the UK? Is going to be pink China, and I've got a clump here, and we've got some old leaves that have gone over that could be cutting off, but I haven't cut them off. They're there. So this is probably one corm that went in probably spring last year, so there's maybe 3 or 4 plants last year left in. This is a tub filled with gravel, which the pond water filters through, so basically it's been left in there all winter in standard water with gravel, and it hasn't rotted out, and that's definitely the best colocasia I've got, which is you know, done nothing with other than pumping water through it into the pond. And reasonable sized leaves, maybe 1.5 foot, but just a real good thick clump. And we've had some that are flowering, just a really good all-rounder. Not the most exciting looking colocasia, but for a lot of people, I think in the cooler summer conditions, it's going to be the outright winner. And just unfortunate that's not, I suppose it's pretty in its own way. It's got the pink stems and it's got the little purpley blue dot in the middle. Yeah, I mean, that's a nice little starter colocasia if you're getting into your tropicals, and again, that's going to be definitely the best performing for one that's left in the ground. And these do get quite large. I've seen leaves on these 3, nearly 4 foot in the right conditions. But yeah, again, for growing outside in the UK, this is going to be your best option. Recently purchased Sapphire Black Gecko, starting to open a new leaf. Definitely my favourite black colocasia. This is not going to be hardy, but for a black variety, it's definitely the best in my eyes. I just love the iridescent, bluey, oily finish to the leaves. Yeah, so that's recently purchased from B&M, £12.50. What a bargain for a plant with four little pups on it, and a good sized main plant. Right, so that's a few around the pond. We have got some growing down the bottom of the garden, or the other end of the garden, so we'll have a look at them now, because some of them are potentially good cold hardy ones which can be left in the ground over winter in a lot of the UK, and you would expect them to come back. So we have talked about the standard Escalenta, which is the standard green. For me, hardy comes back every year. Obviously the pink China, hardy, comes back every year. There is another one, the dreaded one that starts with G, which no one can pronounce, Golianthus or something similar. I don't grow that one. I don't think it's different enough or showy enough to bother purchasing. I may buy one if I get one at the right price, but at the minute they're still a little bit hard to get hold of and a little bit pricey, so I'm not one I've been sought out to get hold of. So potentially, again, this is not the best example because this is actually quite a dry bed here, but I've got a lot of colocasia here, and I do water them at least once a week, but they could do with watering every day really. But this is the burgundy stem, so it's a sort of hybrid burgundy stem, and this one for me is quite often coming back. I won't say guaranteed to come back every winter or after every winter, but certainly 9 times out of 10 for me this will come back. It's quite hardy, and it's quite a different looking leaf shape to a lot sharper arrow type shaped leaves rather than the more rounded you'd expect. But yeah, sort of a nice crinkle touch to them as well. And again, this is not going to be a fair example of what grows best in a UK summer, because again, some of these have been left to dry out quite a lot and they're not done particularly well. We have got a Jack's Giant here, and again, in the hothouse we've got leaves over 4 foot. Here they're barely a foot, so they do need a bit of heat to get the size, but they are quite hardy, believe it or not. These tend to overwinter for me, again, sort of probably 8 times out of 10 they make it through winter and come back, but they just need heat to get to a good size. A fairly new one I've tried this year, so I don't know how hardy it is, but it's a very similar looking one to the burgundy stem, but the stem is a bit darker. This is Metallica, and again, it's not a good example because even though we have got a few little pups around it, not the best example because it's been kept dry. But what I'm going to do is with this one, leave it in the ground and we'll see if it comes back next year. So that is the Metallica, and I've seen these grow quite well. I mean, they tend to get quite tall and quite a large petiole ratio to the leaf, so quite tall standing, but quite a small leaf. So again, even the pink Chinas along here have struggled just due to the dry. Another Escalenta there, really struggling, dry. More pink Chinas and Escalenta. I mean, seem to be the more in shade we go, the better the pink China are in dry conditions, so it doesn't dry out so quick, the soil. But for a dry kept colocasia in the ground, this one is one hands down. It is Colocasia fontanesii, and again, this one for me, I'd say 8 times out of 10 will survive the winter. I always take an offset as an insurance policy, but in general they tend to come back as well. And when I say come back, what I would do, minimal protection. So a lot of people say I don't want to be digging up plants and overwintering them. Well, digging up a plant is no big deal really. You know, dig it out, put it in dry compost, put it in a pot, keep it cool. That takes all of 5 minutes, that's no big deal. But if you really don't want to dig stuff out, it's always going to be a little bit of a gamble. You never know how wet or cold the winter's going to be. But what I do is put a decent amount of mulch over, so you're sort of insulating it from the penetrating frosts, and you could put a waterproof barrier over that mulch and then mulch it again, so it just keeps it dry as well as that insulating area. So it's going to keep the corm dry, and I think 9 times out of 10, because it's been left in the ground, it'll still have a few roots, so it don't tend to rot off. Whereas if you dry store a corm, they can rot off because there's no roots to take up any moisture. So that first bit of growth, and you'll often get a leaf come up before you've got any roots, and it's easy to rot them off because they've got no roots to take up the moisture, so they do tend to rot really easy. But if they're left in the ground, because they've already got roots, they haven't been disturbed, they've still got a few live roots, even in, you know, the cool spring conditions, with a little bit of light and a little bit of heat, Then roots will absorb the moisture and they won't rot, they'll start growing, rather than the corm rotten, which is the biggest problem, overwintering colocasias. So dry and insulation. I'd have put another way to do it would be to, and this is what I do in general, and I'll probably do a video when the time comes as well, but as we're talking about colocasias, we'll talk about how I do it. And that's again just a couple of inch layer of mulch and a plastic cloche, or one of these plastic domes with a little swivel on the top so you can let a little bit of air in. And I'll quite often fill that with dried fallen leaves, so it's again another insulation barrier for the frost to not be able to penetrate. And yeah, just pin that down over the corms. That'll be keeping it dry and insulated, and then when it do start warming up a little bit, then you can take the leaves out and put the cloche back over, so that gives it that extra bit of heat in the spring, and that'll get your plant growing a bit faster as well, and then you're already on a head start. Right, so yeah, this is the Fontanesii, and for me, one of my favourite sort of cold hardy colocasias. The leaves are a little bit thicker, a little bit darker, a little bit 3D, and the stems are really dark. So yeah, that's a definite one to try if you live in a milder part of the UK for outdoor overwintering. Right, so we'll finish up on this one because this is a new one on me this year. So this is Aloha. So this is one of the Royal Hawaiian, some more tropical colocasias. I bought this, I think I paid about £4 for it as an empty tub with just the, I still got the tag. So I bought this in early spring. There was no growth on it. It was just an empty pot, but I could see the corms at the top and they were still solid. So I gave it a gamble. And yeah, for £4, I mean, there's probably about 10 plants in there, and that's done quite well. That's really nice. Again, sort of a iridescent. I mean, some of these leaves aren't the best example because they've been in the hothouse for a while, so they've got a bit of hard water build up on them, so it's dulled the leaves off. But the newer emerging leaves are really nice. I don't know what you describe that as, sort of a browny green, iridescent with the green veins. But yeah, definitely one I'll be dividing up for next year and putting about the garden. Right, so that's a little look at some of the colocasias we've been growing, some hardy, some not. In conclusion, pink china is always going to be one people want because that's going to be the hardiest, and it's also the best overall growth for a summer in the UK because they don't need stupid heat to get a big size. So even if you've got a cold hardy colocasia, doesn't mean it's going to grow well in our type of summers here in the UK. And again, I'll use the Jack's Giant as an example. I find that to be quite hardy and survives most winters, but just won't get any decent size without, you know, we do get a good summer now and then, and if you water it and feed it, that will get a good size. But yeah, so there you go. That's my experiences in the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years growing colocasias, and every year I try different species, different types, and yeah, there's always going to be new ones coming out which I'm going to try. But in general, you always fall back to the backbone basics with the good standard colocasia, esculenta and pink china. Always a good bit. Right, we'll leave it there. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.